We are now beginning geometry. Today's lesson we're going to talk about the circumference of circles. So we're going to use two formulas. The formulas are circumference, or capital C, equals pi times the diameter, d is for diameter, or circumference equals 2 pi times the radius, r is the radius. And if we look at the circle, the circumference is around the outside of the circle. The diameter cuts right through the center and cuts the circle in half, forming two semicircles, and the radius is half of the diameter. As always, please complete the do now, watch this screencast, and then complete the Google form on circumference of circles. When you do your reflection, please be specific if there was something you did not understand. So what you are going to learn is how to find the circumference of circles and apply the formula, as well as solve problems involving circumference. In order to apply the formula for circumference, we have to know the relationship between the diameter and the radius. So for circumference, you have two formulas. Circumference equals pi times the diameter, or circumference equals 2 pi times the radius. And if we look at our image of the circle, the diameter cuts the circle into two semicircles, and the radius is half the diameter. So knowing this, if the diameter is double the radius, we would have to take the diameter and divide it by 2. So if the diameter is 4 feet, the radius is 2 feet. 2 radii make up 1 diameter. So it also works in the reverse. If the radius is 8 feet, the diameter is double the radius, so that would mean it is 16 feet. Okay? So take a minute and see if you can figure out the next two. So if we have a diameter that's 1 5/10 inches and we need to find the radius, we have to cut it in half. So if we divide 1 5/10 by 2, you will get the radius to be 75/100 inches. Okay? And then remember, 2 radii make up the diameter. So if we take 3 75/100 and we double that to get the diameter, we would get the diameter to be 7.5 yards. Okay? So knowing whether you're given the diameter or the radius is very helpful when using the circumference formula. The first example we're going to do is find the circumference of a circle. So you always have two formulas. Circumference equals pi d, or circumference equals 2 pi r. And in this case, when you look at the circle, you're given the diameter of 3. So it's best to use the first formula. So you plug in d as 3. So circumference equals pi times the diameter, right? And you could write this in terms of pi. So circumference would equal 3 pi. But then if you have to evaluate if pi is 3 14/100, you do circumference equals 3. And in place of pi, you sub in 3 14/100. And then you multiply. And the circumference of this circle would be 9 42/100 inches. Circumference is like perimeter, so it's just plain inches. So hopefully you realize to use the formula circumference equals pi d. And when you subbed in 12 for d, you knew circumference is 12 pi. And then from there, if you sub in 3 14/100 for pi, you should have realized circumference equals 37 68/100 inches. And that's how you solve basic circumference given the diameter. So the next example is similar, but we're going to use the different formula. So you have circumference equals pi d, or circumference equals 2 pi r. In this case, when looking at the circle, you're given the radius. So the best formula to use is the second one. So we sub in 5 3/10 for the radius. So you get circumference equals 2 pi times 5 3/10. Then when you multiply 2 times 5 3/10, you get circumference equals 10 6/10 pi. That would be how you'd leave it in terms of pi. But now if we want it when pi is equal to 3 14/100, we take 3 14/100 and sub it in for pi. And then we have to multiply 10 6/10 times 3 14/100 to get our final circumference, as circumference equals 33 28/100 centimeters when rounded to the nearest hundredth. So take a minute and pause the video. I will write the two formulas on the board, And try this one. Circumference equals pi d or circumference equals 2 pi r. Pause and then start again. So I hope you realize that the circumference in terms of pi is 14 and 2/10 pi. And then when you evaluate, you sub in 3 and 1400ths for pi, it is 44 and 5900th meters. That is the circumference given the radius. Okay, so now we're going to do an example, a word problem, where we need to solve for the diameter. Bernard works at a community center that has a circular swimming pool with a circumference of 40 meters. He would like to use a rope to divide the pool down the center. What should be the length of the rope? So we know circumference equals pi d. We know the circumference of this pool is 40. So if we're solving for d, we want to get d by itself. We can divide both sides by pi. And we know the equivalent of pi is approximately 3 and 1400ths. So we take 40 and we divide it by 3 and 1400ths to get the diameter. And when rounded to the nearest tenth, the diameter of rope that he needs is 12 and 7/10 meters. That will cut across the pool. The next example is a landscaper that has a tree whose root from a ball-shaped bulb with a circumference of 110 inches. So we know the circumference is 110 inches. We want to know the minimum diameter of the hole. So if this is the hole, we want to know the minimum diameter that he will have to dig to plant the tree. So circumference equals pi times the diameter. We know the circumference is 110. We don't know what the diameter is. So we are going to divide both sides by pi, and we know the equivalent of pi is 3 and 1400ths. It will always be 3 and 1400ths. So you take 110 and divide it by 3 and 1400ths. And the diameter of the hole that he has to dig, rounded to the nearest inch, is 35 inches. Okay? So this is basically the same, but not a word problem. We need to find the radius and the diameter. So we know circumference equals pi times the diameter, or circumference equals 2 pi times the radius. So first we'll solve for the diameter. So we know 62 and 8/10 equals pi times the diameter. We are going to divide both sides by pi, or the equivalent of 3 and 1400ths. So we do 62 and 8/10 divided by 3 and 1400ths. And we would get the diameter, in this case, is 20 miles. Now, if you remember, the radius is half the diameter. So once I get the diameter, I can cut it in half, and the radius in this case would be 10 miles. Once again, pause this video and try on your own. We know the circumference of 69 and 800ths equals pi times the diameter. So when you divide both sides by pi, or its equivalent, you get d to equal 22. If the diameter is 22, the radius is half of that. So we take 22 and divide it by 2, and we get the radius to be 11. That is how, given the circumference, you solve for the diameter and the radius. Your Google form will be 20 questions. Remember, circumference equals pi times the diameter. Circumference equals 2 pi times the radius. The diameter is 2 radii, right? And the radius is half of the diameter. So those are some formulas to keep in mind. Also, when we write in terms of pi, we are simply just leaving the pi symbol. But in most cases, it will tell you that pi is equivalent to approximately 3 and 1400ths. This is why majority of the time they celebrate Pi Day on March 14th. Just a little thought. Okay, so today is day 1 of circumference. Please try your best. Remember, I will have a Zoom at 11:30 for any questions. Please watch the video before the Zoom. Thank you.